Hi, everybody. There's a few things we're going to go over today. Just a basic overview of the direction of the talk, because it's quite a lot of pieces we're going to weave together. So first of all, why should we even care about ethics? Second of all, how do we apply these ideas about AI ethics to the product lifecycle as a whole through all of the stages of the product lifecycle? And what are the special concerns when you're developing AI or even machine learning products? So with that said, ethics, why bother? And so we've seen this problem occur from a business level. If you are engaging in dark patterns, eventually the news will come out. So we've had several scandals recently. Let me just move this so you can see better. Sort of starting in October 2018, Amazon hit front page news for gender bias in their AI hiring tool. The technology was actually deprioritizing any candidates that had gender-related volunteer or internal enrichment opportunities on their resume. So somebody who had a leadership role with a women's organization, the AI tool would say, oh, women are less successful in getting jobs here, so we shouldn't call that candidate in. They got in a lot of trouble. Fast forward a little bit, March 2019, IBM got in a lot of trouble in the news for their photo scraping scandal. Also in 2018, Facebook has the Cambridge Analytica scandal. November 2019, Google Project Nightingale. Rolling into 2020, you have July 2020, Microsoft in the news for racially biased algorithms being provided for police surveillance. That's a big oh no moment for everyone. August 2020, Facebook has confirmed that their algorithm is radicalizing people. Following on the Cambridge Analytica scandal, that was pretty scary. Google, following on to that, oh my goodness, sorry. In November 2020, big scandal because they had ethical AI researchers fired under a basis that was highly questionable. And then very recently, October 2021, the Facebook Papers investigation has come out, which is again about, algorithmically, what are we driving people to do? And so even if you're not personally very invested in the idea that we should be designing human first and dark patterns are not the best way to pursue our goals, it's very clear that, especially for companies of sizable impact, should you be engaging in dark patterns, it will eventually come out and not be so good for you. So there's sort of two different sides to this debate ethically. One is the Peter Norvig sort of attitude of, AI's definition of products under new methods is similar to approaches to cognition across the other sciences. This is kind of a mouthful, but what it actually means is to say, we're not really doing anything with AI that we weren't doing before AI. Whereas the Noam Chomsky sort of opinion is that a purely statistical approach to AI is shallow and inadequate compared to the capabilities of human cognition. So why is this important? As we build products that utilize AI or machine learning, we need to consider what the capacity of the machine is versus what the capacity of the human is. In my opinion, both Peter and Noam are correct. Our AI algorithms define progress in a very similar approach as we define cognitive progress elsewhere. And surely the thinking of the AI can be considered under similar methods as, a regular, I suppose you could say, non-intelligent algorithm of some kind of like, okay, input A plus B to sum C, right? But also we need to consider sort of the pitfalls of, just because it's an intelligent algorithm doesn't make it a human. And so there's some factors wherein as we take a statistical approach, we need to also consider the human factors we're missing out on. So how do we de-risk this gap between AI and human understanding? How do we fill in the difference between sort of the human's ability to say, oh, yeah, actually, for example, we shouldn't allow our algorithm to deprioritize women because they haven't been picked up as candidates in the past. We have a government mandate to increase our gender diversity. That's quite the opposite effect that we're looking for. I need to set an additional constraint. For example, our algorithms are only as smart as we instruct them to be. So in my opinion, the best way to move forward is to be thinking about these ethical questions at each stage of the product lifecycle in just the same way as you'd be thinking about your business development strategy or your cost strategy or your engineering strategy. So just a quick overview for anybody who's maybe newer to product management or hasn't looked at the full life cycle in a moment. These are the 10 phases of the product lifecycle I'm going to cover today when it comes to ethical and effective AI product management. So you have a problem or an opportunity, you select a solution, you research it, you develop requirements and initial design, you prioritize features, you go execute and ship the thing with your go-to-market strategy, you run analytics to determine how it's performing, you iterate based on that information, and eventually you have some kind of end of life. So, for today's talk, I thought it would be fun to think about an AI dating app with regard to this product lifecycle. So I just made a quick little tagline for this app, finding true love with algorithmic help, right? So what if we could match people to their life partners using AI? There's a lot of science to suggest this is possible. So I thought it would be a cool little opportunity for us to sort of discuss how this applies through the product lifecycle. So the first thing to say is, what shifts are needed compared to the sort of regular product lifecycle. And we've touched this on a little bit already, but so, you can think of the product lifecycle as phasic. You do discovery, you validate and justify and figure out what your requirements are. You actually develop the thing, you deliver it, you validate your product market fit, and then you sell over time, you fix issues, you develop next versions, and you go to end of life. And to me, the small but profound adjustment is to be adding an ethics stage, an ethics question, an ethics, I suppose you could say, gate as well to each part of the product lifecycle. So as I'm generating ideas, what are the things that I want to make sure my product doesn't do? As I'm analyzing what the market is asking for, I'm also asking, hey, is that the right thing to be doing? Is that something that is good for the world as a whole? Or maybe is that somebody who wants to take a bigger piece of the pie and leave crumbs for everyone else? As we develop, are we setting constraints? Are we thinking long-term to ensure that the constraints we set are not just, enabling us to hit next quarter's metrics, but also are protecting us from a potential newsworthy event of, oh, wow, that was an unethical application of AI. As we go to the marketplace, how are we making sure that we are not engaging in marketing strategies that are themselves damaging? Is there something specific we need to disclose because we have AI or ML technology as part of our product? And over the life of the product, are we monitoring it to make sure that we're not having unintended effects? Are we checking in to make sure like, oh, wow, yeah, there's human eyes that can flag undesirable effects, and we have capacity planned to do something about that if it should arise. It's not enough to say, oh, we found a problem and we have no engineering capacity to do anything except ignore it. And then the other piece that's very special is end of life is not just about saying, oh, here are your options. Thank you so much for being with us today. It becomes a question of, okay, what happens to this information later? How do I make sure that anyone who uses this in the future is also going to consume it and use it in an ethical way? There's a responsibility with end of life to ensure that however your product gets consumed next is also ethical. So here are a few best practices for making sure that your products are ethically built and also effective, because certainly the ethics question introduces a ton of risk to the product and to the business and to the customers and users who enjoy your product. So I like to break it into these 4 categories of market, data, models, and lifetime. And so these would kind of be in the addition to the quick questions I walked through for each phase of the product life cycle before, but you can kind of see again, is it ethical to solve this problem? Are our data sets ethically sourced and ethically implemented? Are our models built with ethical constraints and monitoring for results in terms of, is this the right thing to do? Do we have undesirable effects? And over the lifetime of the product, you know, always checking in and saying, I really need to, excuse me for 1 second. I need to turn on do not disturb somehow. Oh my goodness. Oh, I can't figure out how to do it. Anyway, a little embarrassing. How do we make sure that we are checking on our product at every phase of the product life cycle to make sure that we're managing what happens and we're following through on the ethical questions that we know are important to ask to mitigate the risks of utilizing AI in today's marketplace. So how do we get started? As we have an opportunity for this dating app, the first questions, you know, with that framing we can be asking are, you know, how do we know that it's okay to solve this problem with AI? A lot of that is a question of consent. Surely, you know, in this case, it would be better to say, okay, can we tell our users and maybe make it a marketable sort of copywriting option to say, hey, I can match you better using AI. Here's what our product does, here's how it works, and here's why that's good for you. There's a big ethical question of like, is it okay to implement AI ML technology without telling people? And I lean towards no, mainly because people should be enthusiastically participating and understanding exactly what it is that they're receiving from you. They should be informed as consumers. And certainly a lot of ethical research around AI picks up in places where people don't expect AI and ML models to be extant and suggest that, you know, this is not the right path. You should be disclosing to people what you're doing. And also, you know, you can think, okay, is it all right to match people using AI? Dating apps in particular have had algorithmic matching for a very long time. It's part of the category experience. And so, you know, yes, it already exists. Is it okay to go further? Well, is it going to be harmful to people? Probably not. Dating is not life or death. As long as people are, you know, enthusiastic and informed, probably you're all right from an ethics perspective, would be my opinion. But ideally, you'd be talking this through with your, you know, founding team and so forth to make sure that everybody at the table is in agreement about, you know, are we doing something positive for the world? So let's say we move forward and we've decided, yes, we're going to do this and it's time to select a solution. I touched on this a little bit in the previous slide, but you know, for our AI dating app, what is the solution that we want to integrate here? You know, do we want the whole application to be fully automated? How do we want people to be interacting with the app itself? What's the experience we want to give our users? I would suggest that, you know, picking your path forward, selecting your solutions should, you know, there's a higher need for a human first, user focused approach when you're building AI products, mainly because once it's built, you will have less control to adjust that user experience architecture because of the nature of how algorithms work. So it's very, very important to say, okay, this is what the user should experience. This is what the user should not experience. This is what we want the AI to do, and this is what we want humans to do. This is how we're going to implement safeguards and so forth. Even at this early stage of what solution do we pick, it's very important. So as we design, we need to be setting smart requirements. And in this case, that might look like this constraints matrix of, yes, we want it to match people based on X, Y, and Z. No, we don't want it to take action based on, you know, certain attributes. You know, maybe we want to make sure that people are not being negatively impacted by things like their socioeconomic status or you know, even appearance is a big factor in terms of dating apps of like, how do you ethically handle that issue and make sure that people have an equitable opportunity to find love on the app. That's all part of setting your design constraints. And especially as you design the models themselves, your constraints are going to be your best friend. And we'll touch on that a little bit more deeply later. And even your prioritization we all know smart prioritization is key for successful products. If you don't choose the right priorities, you won't make money, you won't serve people. It's really, really key. And so when it comes to this example of the AI dating app, your prioritization process has another factor to consider. So it's not just, is this impactful for the business? Does this serve a huge number of our customer and user base effectively? Is this something that's impactful for those users? Is this something that helps the business? Is this something that, builds the reliability and scalability of our app itself? All good and fine. And also, we want to prioritize the core features that are going to have a protective effect on the product itself. So that might look like some kind of filtering feature, some kind of disclosure feature to say, hey, these are the things that the AI is matching you based on. Are you okay with that? As you discuss how to build, it becomes a little bit more of a broader creative process to say, we need to set some constraints. We're going to have a creative process with it because AI is still fairly new. It isn't, really codified yet what the best way to do these things is. And so therefore, as I am setting my priorities, I'm double checking to make sure, hey, I'm not putting the cart before the horse in terms of taking advantage of opportunity before I've implemented safeguards for that, model you build or feature you build, so forth. It has to be safeguards and feature at the same time, or even safeguards before feature. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for risk. So execution is even more important with AI products than it is with sort of, if you're building a simple front end product, the risks are, not as big when you're just writing HTML or JavaScript even, compared to what could possibly happen on the negative end with AI. But thankfully, there's a very clear path to executing effectively. So again, we're still looking at this AI dating app. There's going to be pieces to it, right? Like you're going to have a back end that stores your data. You can have your front end where people can, say, I like this person, and I'm going to say, yes, I want to engage with them. And then you also are going to have this piece that's working in the background, connecting all of it together, which is going to be your algorithmic model, or the algorithmic help in this little tagline I created. So I touched a little bit earlier on making effective constraints, and I'll let you read through this very busy slide. And actually, that's the link to this study itself. But essentially, the thesis here that they've proved is to say you can set effective constraints in AI models that resolve the unintentional results, unfair penalization, and ensure that fairness constraints are met. So essentially, at a really basic level of English, you can say that there are certain types of constraints that you can engineer into your ML and AI models to ensure that your models behave consistently with societal norms or ethical policies, or even more simply, you can set guardrails on your models that will make sure that you're not doing evil things, at least not intentionally. And should something unintentional happen, you've also de-risked because people will discover that, well, they made an effort and it was a reasonably detailed and work-intensive effort. So it's not that bad things will never happen. Certainly we can't remove all risk, but at least by setting effective constraints, you can say, look, I tried to do this and that and the other thing, and it's all research backed, and I did my best, and I'm so sorry it wasn't enough. It's a very different conversation than, I didn't care, we didn't think about it, which, a lot of these sort of recent news articles about AI ethics events since 2018 have had a similar theme. So how do you de-risk without disrupting build? Personally, I like to use TensorFlow and Keras for this. You want to have a build culture of fail fast, fail forward. Certainly, you don't want to be attached to using a model that is not sufficiently performant in terms of ethics. And your technical requirements must include those applied ethics constraints that we're talking about last slide. So why Keras and TensorFlow? Simply because it keeps it really simple. Certainly as we dive deeper into the complexities of implementing AI and ML models, you can get it deep into the weeds with your engineering team of, how do I do this? and how deeply do I go, and how much do I create for myself? And by using Keras and TensorFlow, you don't have to re-engineer everything yourself for your team. You can use existing technology to sort of deload and simplify the engineering effort needed to implement ethical constraints. So that's why I'm a big fan, but of course there's many approaches. So within TensorFlow and Keras, you have TensorFlow Lattice, TensorFlow Constrained Optimization Library, and Keras optimizers, which are themselves customizable. So in my opinion, these are enough to get you through the gate of, have I set ethical constraints? Is that a part of my requirements for my engineering team for us to ship this product? It doesn't have to be a huge, oh no, how do I do monotonicity optimization on my own? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already out there for you to use, and it's just a question of choosing to use it. So another aspect that comes along in terms of like, well, how do we ship this thing, is going beyond unit testing to make sure that, does my AI model work? Does it do what it's intended to do? Will my users be happy with it? Will they buy it? Are there unintended consequences? And in my opinion, the most important question is, what is the worst thing that someone could use this for? With a dating app, what is the worst thing someone could use this for is actually a pretty dark question. And so you want to build constraints to prevent the worst case scenario. I would hope that you wouldn't want anybody to be using your data for nefarious purposes. But even if that's not something that motivates you personally, it's huge risk to your business if someone does something profoundly evil using your product. And so it's really important to do ethical testing and, consequence testing, I suppose you could say, as you do your unit testing of your product, to make sure that it's going to be working as you planned. And certainly there are many cases where things don't exactly go according to plan. And rather than clawing back once you've already gone to market, in my opinion, it's better to have some capacity planned for potential changes at this stage. So what happens when you go to market? There are some special concerns for AI ML products. Speaking of our AI dating app again, how can we be sure that we are disclosing to people exactly what it is that we're doing? It becomes important. As I was speaking about enthusiastic consent earlier, I think the time has gone and is past where we could quite simply release something and not tell people what it's really about, a la Facebook. You couldn't get away with that now, to say, hey, use this for free, and not disclose that you're scraping people's data. We live in a post-GDPR world, so we might as well get used to radical transparency and make it a part of our go-to-market strategy. So as you release your product, you want to manage your PR, monitor usage, and think not just about profit, think about your legacy, think about what your responsibility is as a platform, and how your ethical history impacts your product viability. I think we're seeing a change in the marketplace now where, if people have a history of being ethically exploitative, it's affecting their retention metrics and acquisition metrics. So it becomes very important over time. And as you, I'm low on time, so I'm gonna speed through the rest of this. But in terms of your analytics, you really want to be monitoring not just for, those profitability metrics, but the health, performance, and impact of your algorithm. What is really happening? And, have that capacity planned to do something about it. Your changes shouldn't just be about expanding into the market, but it should also be about making sure that as you grow, your algorithm scales appropriately and safely and ethically. And as you iterate, same thing, are you scaling from an engineering standpoint? Are you scaling in a way that allows you to be equally as performant, both in terms of the engineering and in terms of the business and the customers and users, but also in terms of your ethics? It just needs to be a part of your process over time. And then as you go through the end of life process, what's the worst thing someone could do? How do you lock this up and make sure that any of the parts that could, potentially be dangerous are not publicly available? And so that's sort of the end, at a high level. You want to be a steward for the algorithms you create, and you want to make sure that you are standing in a standpoint of, not only am I as a product manager here to make the product grow and to serve as many people as you can and to make a huge impact, but I'm also here to be impactful in my stewardship of my AI ML product. I'm here to make sure that, as we move forward, as even if we're at end of life, that nothing horrible can happen as a result of what we built, or I've done as much as I can, as much as in my power, to make sure that evil things don't happen because of us. So what happens to this data after it's out in the world, and what's next after we've done this, are sort of the two big questions to ask in end of life. And with that said, you're ready to go out there and execute more effectively on your AI ML products, because you're not just thinking about, oh, business opportunity, customer opportunity, user opportunity. You're also thinking, hang on a second, how do we make sure that we manage this in an ethical way that supports our business and de-risks us as we move forward with these more cutting edge technologies? So thank you very much.